Let's get the quick summary of my recommendations right out of the way, out of the gate, not waste anybody's time, and then I'll give you more details on why I made all of these picks and should you even be buying a GPU right now at all in the the later section of the video. So my initial recommendation is if you're buying a new graphics card, spend at least $200 to get an RX 6600. Anything below this point is kind of diminishing returns on the value you're saving, like you're saving a few dollars but you're losing a lot of performance, and the RX 6600 can still play most modern games at somewhat reasonable settings on a 1080p display. If you absolutely have to have an Nvidia GPU, don't buy anything lower than the RTX 3060 12GB, and do make sure it's the 12GB version. I'm seeing these on sale as low as $270 right now. But I think if you are creeping closer to that $300 price point, I think the 6750 XT from AMD is the most powerful graphics card in that $300 range. If you're spending closer to $400, I think stepping up to the RX 6800 XT 16GB graphics card, which is currently available around $430, makes a lot of sense. And then if you have to buy an Nvidia GPU of around this caliber for, a solid 1440p gaming, I think the best deal currently available from that side of things is a $499 RTX 4070. Now, whether it's worth stepping up from the 6800 XT, we'll talk about more a little bit later in the video. Past this point, I think is diminishing returns, and you're about to get some new high-end GPUs, but if you absolutely have to buy a GPU that can do basically anything you want on a 1440p display in any game, I would say that the 4070 Ti Super with 16GB of VRAM, a lot of ray tracing performance, high-quality upscaling features, and frame generation is kind of a do-it-all card without spending, $1,000 or more. Past this point, again, you're going to get supplanted very soon by a 5090 and 5080, so it might make very little sense to buy in anything higher than this, if this even makes sense. We'll talk more about how I made all these decisions in a second, but first, unfortunately, I have to admit that I've been spreading misinformation in the comment section, or at least information I spread is now out of date. Mr. Daniel, do you sleep? No, has been upgraded to yes, because I am now proudly pro nap. Honestly, guys, I moved closer to my job teaching, because I also do that on top of running the YouTube channel full-time. People are like, how are you doing this? Power naps in the afternoon are now possible. I get home from work quick, get in a power nap before my kids get home, and it's been amazing. Now, in the past, I couldn't nap. I am now completely blacked out, cannot see a bit of light, and also I can kick on some white noise right here with completely flat Bluetooth speakers, which is amazing because I'm a side sleeper, and headphones in the past have been incredibly painful, making it difficult for me to nap. This is also really nice when I go to sleep at night. A lot of times I like to put on like an audiobook or a podcast, and I can't tell where any of you are. This is completely blacked out. Anyway, I'm gonna take that back off. But the point is that this has completely revolutionized both my actual sleep at night as well as my ability to actually get in some afternoon naps, which is really amazing. Really, it has made me so much more alert and productive. There is a wide variety available. Again, this is the sound version, which I think is really cool, but they also have the Pro version. They have the Silk Mask, Manta Weighted Mask. We've got a cool mask, a steam mask, the original Manta Sleep Mask, and a huge thank you to Manta Sleep for sponsoring today's video and allowing me to be proudly pro-nap. If you follow my link in the video description, not only can you get discounts, but if you're buying around Black Friday, check this out. If you spend $99, you can get 20% off, $149, 25% off, and $199, get 30% off. And you're like, well, one mask, what am I gonna do? Guys, buy these for your family members. I know I always have a massive problem trying to figure out what to buy my family for gifts. This has absolutely not only revolutionized my sleep, but it has also made it so easy for me to buy gifts for friends and family this year, because I am going to help them revolutionize their sleep as well with a Manta Sleep Mask, and get my holiday shopping done optimally and efficiently, and stuff they'll actually like. Again, encourage you to check out that link in the video description. So before talking about how I made all of the decisions for each of those GPU recommendations at each price point, I think it's important to acknowledge the elephant in the room, which is the new GPU series coming out in early 2025. We still only have rumors, but the rumors are that the RTX 50 series will launch in January of 2025 with the 5090 and 5080 class products, and possibly followed shortly after in February with the 5070 class products, and shortly after that in March with the 5060 class products, which means if you buy anything right now, it's possible that the value propositions will all get disrupted very soon, and especially at the higher end, which is why buying a higher end GPU right now didn't really make my recommendation list. Doesn't mean you couldn't, just be aware of this. However, compared to last month, we now have to take something else into account, which is, are GPU prices actually about to get a lot worse instead of better when we get this new generation due to tariffs? So let me pull up an article like this one, for example. There's a bunch of these floating around, and I am by no means a political expert, nor is this trying to be any sort of political commentary. But the fear around prices possibly going up a lot, at least in the United States next year, is due to the results of the presidential election. With Donald Trump winning the election, his discussion has been to impose tariffs on all imports, and especially high tariffs on Chinese imports. Now, that could potentially have a large impact on PC component pricing. Stuff that is made in China, again, could have tariffs of up to 60%. Now, tariffs are taxes paid on the import of the product into the country. So if these were in place in time for the import, then those import prices could go up by 60%. The company doing the importing pays that, and then will have to find some way of maintaining their profit margins, which likely means passing that, at least some of that price increase on their cost off to the consumers buying the product. In other words, it could have prices go up. Now, if the GPU manufacturing companies aren't doing stuff in China specifically, again, there is still some discussion of a 10 to 20% tariff on all imports, which could have that effect. However, while I've seen a lot of people running completely doom and gloom, like this is absolutely guaranteed disaster, it is important to note that Donald Trump has discussed these plans, but he is not currently yet president. That doesn't happen until January. And then also, when he becomes president, when does he actually do this? Does he do this at all? What will be the specific tariff amounts? Will there be exclusions for certain types of products? Like, for example, I think GPUs did get an exclusion, at least a timed exclusion during his previous term. And then, will that type of thing happen currently? So what I have to say about all of this is that we don't know exactly what will happen. Also, again, because of the proposed launch dates for the 50 series being in January and then falling shortly in February and March with the lower tier products, if that's the case, we're also seeing rumors about the production for these GPUs already happening now. They're in massive production, and if those are getting imported now, then before any potential tariffs go into effect, that would mean that the supply of GPUs that's available at the launch of these products likely would not have actually paid any tariffs, so that the tariffs would not be responsible for potential price increases, at least initially. Now, would later waves of the product possibly have that, or if the later series are actually further out than February or March? Again, there's a lot we just don't know. So I did want to address that in this month's GPU buying guide, which is that potentially waiting too long could have tariffs impact pricing, but it's very possible that the at least initial wave of the 50 series will already have been imported before those tariffs hit, if the tariffs do hit and don't have exclusions for GPUs. There's a lot we just don't know. Also, again, how companies respond by, shifting production out of China and things like that. We're seeing headlines related to all that. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about this. And to be clear, I'm not a political commentary channel. I'm not trying to say any of my thoughts on who should have been president, who is going to be president, any of that. I'm just trying to comment on GPU buying advice based on what we know potentially about plans that could be in effect regarding tariffs. Anyway, so now let's circle back around to each of my GPU recommendations and why I made them. So I recommended that the lowest priced new GPU that's probably worth buying is an RX 6600. Why did I make that decision? Well, these are coming in at about $200, so I think they're within a lot of people's budget, and if you go below this, you lose a lot of performance. You start going below 8 gigabytes of VRAM often, and so generally I think you could struggle running the latest games if you go below this. But why this GPU in particular? I've done head-to-head videos of most of the GPUs I'm talking about in this video, and you can certainly watch my full long head-to-heads with massive numbers of games compared at different settings and resolutions and upscaling on and off and ray tracing on and off and all of that. But let me just put it this way. The Nvidia competition is the RTX 3050 8GB at the $199 price point. And quite frankly, it's just so much slower that even feature advantages like DLSS fail to make up for the gap. Running my RX 6600 at native 1080p resolution and running my RTX 3050 at 720p internally using DLSS quality to upscale to a 1080p output, which generally looks worse than native 1080p, it's still slower in many games. And then if you're running them both in at match settings, for example, like running both of these at 1080p very high settings, we can see that my RX 6600 has a massive 43% lead in a game like Ghost of Tsushima at very high settings. Now it does, and it's able to hit 60 FPS maxed out at 1080p, whereas the 3050 is hanging out in the low 40 range. Now, Ghost of Tsushima isn't representative of every game. That's why I test out a lot of games. There's other games where both GPUs, quite frankly, struggle to max games out. Probably the best looking Unreal Engine 5 showcase, regardless of the quality of the gameplay, is currently Hellblade 2, and if you look at it at its maximum settings at 1080p, the RX 6600 can mostly get by with a 30 FPS experience, which in this game is arguably fine. That's what the consoles target, but on PC I'd really want to go for more like 60. But the RTX 3050 can't max it out, hitting a much lower frame rate and giving the RX 6600 overall a 28% performance lead in this game. And if we go down to medium settings, for example, we can see that the RX 6600 is now averaging around 47 FPS, giving it a 24% advantage over the 38 FPS on the 3050. And if we go down to low settings, you actually can get an almost 60 FPS experience on the RX 6600 at a native 1080p resolution, and the RTX 3050 is still stuck in the 40s, meaning the RTX 3050 cannot hit 60 FPS in this game at a native 1080p resolution, no matter how low you turn down the graphics settings, and the RX 6600 can. Now, you can also lower the internal rendering resolution using upscaling technologies. Here we've got DLSS versus Unreal Engine 5's TSR, and DLSS does have an image quality advantage, but at medium settings, the RX 6600 upscaled can hit 65 FPS, and the 3050 is still under 60 FPS even at medium settings and using DLSS quality. So again, I just don't see it. And if you're thinking about, okay, but Nvidia has a ray tracing advantage, I've got to say that the ray tracing performance just isn't really something to write home about on an RTX 3050. So for example, if we go to Cyberpunk with RT reflections added onto the ultra settings, because again, I view ray tracing as like it's beyond the ultra settings, so you try to max out the game without ray tracing and then turn on as much ray tracing as you can. Well, the most visually impactful single ray tracing setting in Cyberpunk, I think, is RT reflections. If you go ahead and kick that on, then the RTX 3050 is only hitting 36 frames per second in the built-in benchmark here. And honestly, some areas of the game are more demanding than the built-in benchmark. The RX 6600 is only hitting 28, meaning the 3050 is absolutely faster here by about 29%. But are you really wanting to play the game in the mid-30 FPS range? And it is absolutely true that you could use upscaling, although I would argue that upscaling at 1080p takes a pretty big image quality hit. although DLSS will take less of an image quality hit than FSR does. But if we do apply both of those, then the performance lead for the 3050 actually drops to 12%, although it has better image quality, and it's still below a 60 FPS experience. So I just really don't think it's a ray tracing experience that I would really recommend. I don't think it's a big selling point, and its lead when ray tracing, which I think is a pretty low priority use case for this class of performance hardware, is, you know, nothing compared to the kind of performance leads you just get at, I think, the more likely situation, which is just running games without ray tracing, where the 6600 has a big performance lead. So that's why I would recommend the RX 6600 in this price class. There's a bit of a dark horse honorable mention here with the Intel Arc A750, which also is available around $200 and has similar performance to the RX 6600 in many games, sometimes even a bit faster, although sometimes slower. And my main issue is it's been hit or miss for me when I test out new game launches. Oftentimes they're just kind of broken at launch. It's been getting better. The graphics driver is getting a lot better for Intel, but I just don't think you're going to have as consistent of an experience with the Intel GPU as far as just being sure games will work at launch, although it has been getting a lot better. Also, with the Intel GPUs, you do need a system with resizable bar support, and somebody buying a $200 GPU as an upgrade might be on a very old platform still as an upgrade, and I think it just could potentially add in some headaches for users upgrading on an older platform. So that's why the RX 6600 gets my recommendation at the $200 price point. Now, why did I give the RTX 3060 12GB kind of an honorable mention as, okay, you have to buy an Nvidia GPU at this price point? This is really, the thing is, I don't necessarily actually recommend the RTX 3060 12GB. I'm just saying I know some people just won't buy AMD. They're gonna buy an Nvidia GPU. The RTX 3060 12GB, unlike the RTX 3050, can actually get good performance, reasonable performance, similar to the RX 6600, a little bit faster. And it also gets the additional VRAM, which is nice to have in some games. There are games that even at 1080p are going over 8 gigabytes of VRAM, which I could talk more about later in this video. And the point is, so the 3060 actually has some things going for it, although it costs a lot more than the RX 6600. It's currently $70 more. And again, similar overall performance level, although a little bit faster, and it does have more VRAM. My main issue here is that you're getting close to the $300 price point. And at the $300 price point, you'd actually be looking at the RTX 4060 up against the 6750 XT. And between those, I would recommend the 6750 XT. This is currently available as low as $299.99, so $300 flat. If we check pricing on something like an RTX 4060, that's also coming in at $295. So these are effectively exactly the same price. One of the biggest differences here is that the 6750 XT is going to come with 12 gigabytes of VRAM, and most games are currently designed around consoles like the PlayStation 5, which have at least 12 gigabytes of VRAM of usable memory, and sometimes more. In which case, a lot of times certain texture settings and effects settings that these GPUs are actually powerful enough to run can sometimes trip up an 8 gigabyte card, and then you'll have missing textures or some performance issues. I've done detailed videos on this if you really want to dive into it. I've got a video of how bad is 8 gigabytes of VRAM in 2024, where I compare the 8 gigabyte 4060 Ti up against the 16 gigabyte version of the same card, where they have identical performance unless you spill over VRAM, in which case we see things like in Horizon Forbidden West at 1440p very high settings DLSS quality. The cards are definitely powerful enough to run it, the 16 gigabyte card hitting 80 FPS, but the 8 gigabyte card tripping up and stuttering, especially in the 1% lows. So again, where reasonable graphics settings at these GPUs are powerful enough to run, 8 gigabytes just doesn't really get you there. Again, watch my full video on that if you want my full thoughts on that topic. If we want to look at just more of a head-to-head of the 6750 XT up against the 4060, I don't have a 6750 XT video because I actually don't have a 6750 XT. I have a 6700 XT, which is slightly slower. But let's see, if we go to like Tech Power Up, for example, and we look at the RTX 4060 as a baseline performance level and look at their relative performance chart, we can see that they have the 6750 XT as about 20% faster than a 4060. Plus it has 50% more VRAM, again at 12 gigabytes versus 8. And again, I don't think we're at a performance tier where ray tracing is a big selling point. And again, you have those VRAM issues. Here's a bit of my head-to-head comparison of a 6700 XT up against a 4060. Keep in mind that the 6750 XT would have an additional 5 or 6% more performance compared to the 6700 XT. So the margins would be, again, closer to 20% margins here rather than the like 14, 15% margins I'm showing in this particular comparison. So do keep that in note. Here I'm showing settings where like at Ratchet and Clank 1440p very high, the 6700 XT is cruising right along at 68 FPS. The 4060 seems okay at 60 except the 1% lows, meaning these massive stutters on the frame time graph because it's spilling over its 8 gigabyte VRAM capacity. So again, you do run into those types of issues. And then again, in other games where you're not spilling over VRAM issues, the card is just faster. Like here we're at 1440p high settings, the 6700 XT is 17% faster. And again, the 6750 XT would be additionally faster compared to that. And then you might be like, okay, what about the ray tracing situation? I know I tested out some Cyberpunk with ray tracing here, for example. And if we take a look at that, so 1080p ultra settings with RT reflections. The 4060 is able to hit 55 FPS there. It's not amazing. Really not particularly compelling. And again, I'd rather not be upscaling at 1080p resolution. I feel like you take a big image quality hit to do that. You get some benefit from the ray tracing. It's kind of a bit of a wash. So again, I just don't feel like the 4060 is a big powerhouse here in the ray tracing capacity. And again, if you really want to push RT settings with like RT overdrive and even use DLSS or FSR, the 4060 is falling down to like 38 FPS here in those modes. So I don't really find the ray tracing a big compelling point at this level of performance. Again, at higher performance tiers, I find NVIDIA's ray tracing performance a much more compelling feature. Now, if you're going to go up from here, then the next kind of step up from NVIDIA GPUs in pricing is the 4060 Ti series. The 4060 Ti 8GB comes in at about $380, and the 16GB version comes in at $450. Now, there's a bit of an issue here, which is, okay, AMD has a competitor with the 7700 XT at about $390, so priced similar to the 8GB model. And then AMD has the 6800 XT, which I'm showing available at $430, which is lower than the 16GB 4060 Ti, although more than the 8GB 8GB 4060 Ti. Now remember, I've already shown that the 8GB card has some issues where it can't take full advantage of its performance at graphic settings that are otherwise reasonable to run. So I don't recommend spending almost $400 on an 8GB graphics card. Which would mean that we'd be buying the 16GB version, except for the fact that, okay, what else can you buy for that price? Again, the 16GB version is currently $450, and the 6800 XT is currently available at $430. I know this says available soon, but I did actually check the Amazon listing specifically, and I could add it to my cart right now at this pricing. So it is absolutely available at that price, although the shipping date is a little bit late, which is, I think, why it was listed as available soon on this listing. So, what is my overall thoughts on this this matchup? Well, specifically, the 6800 XT versus the 16GB 4060 Ti is just significantly faster. Like here's an Unreal Engine game like Returnal running 28% faster on the 6800 XT. In some of my testing, if we go to Tech Power-Ups testing and we set the 4060 Ti, I guess we could pull up the 16GB version if we really need to. The overall performance is about the same. Well, anyway, they have the listings here. I guess they don't list the 4060 Ti 16GB unless you type it in separately. But overall, they have it significantly ahead of the 8GB version. Why am I not seeing the relative performance chart? There it is. Anyway, it is significantly faster. It's a large performance gap between these GPUs. in their relative testing. And again, the only thing you'd want to kind of look at is those feature set differences. You've got the ray tracing feature set. You've got the upscaling feature set. Well, again, upscaling helps boost performance at a cost to image quality, but you already have such a big performance lead that you're mostly kind of coming in at similar performance once you've enabled DLSS versus the native performance on the 6800 XT. And now you have a slightly worse looking image, and you paid more for the GPU, right? What about the ray tracing performance? Well, again, this is one of those where it's like, I just don't find the ray tracing performance to be particularly compelling. If we go at 1080p, for example, 1080p RT Ultra, using DLSS quality at 1080p resolution does get reasonable frame rates on the 4060 Ti, but that's using DLSS at 1080p on a card you're spending like $450 on. A lot of people might be thinking more about like a 1440p test, where at 1440p ray tracing ultra at native resolution, you're actually way down below the 30 FPS mark on the 4060 Ti, so it just doesn't seem really all that great. If you go ahead and kick on DLSS quality, it does help out quite a bit, but you're still under 60 FPS. Yes, you could kick on frame gen, but I think using frame gen from this low of an FPS baseline doesn't really feel great. So I just don't think you're in the category where those big heavy ray tracing settings are really worth it as a major selling point here. That's what I'm kind of getting at. So once again, I just think it's making sense to go the AMD route. Now, that doesn't mean that I believe that for every single price point. Once you get to a certain performance level, the ray tracing results are a little more compelling. What do I mean by that? Well, my next step up is, so if you do have $500 in your budget, I was saying it might make sense to buy an RTX 4070 at that price, which is currently available at $499. Now, the overall raw performance here is going to be about the same as the 6800 XT. There's not a big difference in their overall raw performance. But you do then get the better upscaler and with DLSS versus FSR, and now your ray tracing performance is maybe a little bit more worth it. For example, if we go with the 1440p ray tracing ultra settings with DLSS quality versus FSR quality, the RTX 4070 is able to deliver about 60 FPS baseline performance, where then frame generation from a 60 FPS baseline I think most people would find pretty acceptable and smooth out the motion fluidity on your screen in single player games like this. So this is where I think that starts to make sense, although the issue is you are then paying a lot more money to get to that point, right? You could also compare against the 7800 XT, which costs a little closer to the 4070 and is a little faster than the 6800 XT, or you could go against the 7900 GRE from AMD, which does cost a bit more than the 4070, but is a little faster at raw performance. But the point is, this 4070 class point for me is kind of the tipping point where some people will start to, I think, find the Nvidia feature set with ray tracing and upscaling and all of that more worth it. Whereas I think some people will still just prefer the better overall pricing, raw performance, and additional VRAM, because it is 16 gigabytes versus 12 from AMD. Not everybody's going to be there, but I think this is where I think there's starting to be a good argument, at least for the Nvidia product. But everybody's going to fall on a different point of that kind of argument. So make up your own mind there. Past this point, I have trouble recommending spending more than $500 on a graphics card when we're about to get a new high-end generation very, very soon. That being said, as you can see, this is still not a GPU that can really do it all. In Cyberpunk, for example, this is RT Ultra. If we try to go up to RT Overdrive, trying to get those full path tracing modes, the 4070 still can't really deliver a satisfactory, 1440p experience with that. There are some GPUs that can, but you'd have to go up to something like the 4070 Ti Super. The 4070 Ti Super is slower than a 4080 Super, but it also costs a couple $100 less. It's also, at 1440p at least, able to deliver your full-on RT Overdrive mode with DLSS quality, which I think looks reasonable at 1440p, and average right around the 60 FPS mark. Here I've got it at 59 FPS in the Cyberpunk built-in benchmark. That's also a high enough frame rate that I think using frame generation on top of a 60 FPS baseline can feel pretty good, in which case now your motion fluidity will look more like a 90-something FPS range and will help smooth out those dips when you do, in harder scenes and things like that. So the point is, I think if you're on a 1440p monitor and you want a GPU that can basically, at least using DLSS quality, deliver the full-on path tracing type experience for Nvidia and all of that, then this is the least expensive GPU that can still do everything and has 16 gigabytes of VRAM. Now, AMD does put up a good fight at around the $800 price point, because that's where you're at with this. The 4070 Ti Super, the cheapest ones are $780. That means if you spent a little bit more, you could get a 7900 XTX at $840 currently, which is significantly faster at rasterized performance. So like if I went to the Tech Power Up GPU database again, looked at relative performance, if we set the 4070 Ti Super as the baseline, and then we go ahead and look at the relative performance, they have the 7900 XTX, 20% faster for just a little bit more money. However, that's at rasterized performance, where again, the 7900 XTX can't do the whole, path tracing feature set and all of that. So if you're spending this much money and you want the full feature set, the 4070 Ti Super is the most, affordable, in air quotes, card that can do everything on a 1440p display. But again, AMD is still offering a lot more non-RT performance at the same price. Well, it's not the same, a little more expensive, but a similar price point. So something to keep in mind there. So in general, I'm not necessarily saying I recommend the 4070 Ti Super. I'm just saying if you want to do all of the NVIDIA stuff, it's the most, in quotes, affordable card that can do it all, right? All right, so anyway, those are my recommendations. Again, the quick summary is an RX 6600 is the most affordable graphics card that can play all the latest games, not at maximum settings, but can play them at 1080p. If you have to buy a cheap NVIDIA card, I'd recommend the RTX 3060 12GB version. Make sure it's the 12GB version for around $270. If you're buying around $300, I think the 6750 XT is the way to go. If you're buying around $400, I think the 6800 XT is the way to go. And if you're buying around $500, you could consider whether the additional feature set stuff, but not really getting any more performance, is worth it for the 4070 versus that 6800 XT. And then if you want a 1440p GPU that can basically do all of the big NVIDIA stuff, the 4070 Ti Super is going to be the least expensive one that can still get the job done in path tracing and whatnot at 1440p. Past this point, again, I really think you should be considering the next generation of GPUs coming out soon. We also, I should mention, currently have a bundle deal going on with Indiana Jones and the Great Circle on RTX 40 series GPUs that are 70 and above. It's not available on the 60 class or any of the older generations. So I'll throw that out there. All right, hope you guys enjoyed the video, found it useful and or interesting. And if you're wondering if there's going to be amazing Black Friday deals or something like that, well, I always do a best Black Friday deal PC hardware video, so stay tuned for that if you want to see if there's anything particularly interesting. Sometimes we get good GPU deals, but sometimes we don't. We'll just have to wait and see.